My name is Robin Williamson, genius of this parish. How do you do?
My name is Mike Curran. I come from Edinburgh, and I'm very pleased to meet you all.
The road goes ever on, and be glad for the song has no ending. Hello, I'm Stephen Coates. As I record this, it's the winter solstice. The wind is blowing, the ice is coming, and winter has arrived in Scotland. And so what better to talk about for this occasion than the subject of this episode of the Bureau of Lost Culture. A huge early Christmas present from our friends at Strange Attractor Publishers has arrived. It's a real doorstopper of a book called Be Glad for the Song Has No Ending. It's a wonderful treasure trove, a compendium of writings, art, geeky facts and figures, crazy illustrations, arcane trivia, interviews, clippings and photographs. All about one subject, the incredible string band.
See all the people now.
Artists, collective, myth makers, storytellers, tribe leaders, psychedelic phenomena, hippie cult even. They pioneered world music with albums like The Hangman's Beautiful Daughter, Paul McCartney's favourite album of 1967. They experimented with theatre, film and lifestyle, inspired Led Zeppelin and many other artists. They lived the hippie dream in communes with free love, dressed like medieval prince and princesses, the very essence of the Scottish counterculture. They became international stars for a while, played Woodstock, were acid evangelists and gathered a following, a tribe really, that stayed loyal to them long after they'd gone.
See all the people cry.
I was introduced to them really by Stephen Duffy of the Lilac Time when he told me how inspired he'd been when he first saw them in Birmingham when he was just 14. But now I realise that their story is incredible. Originally a folky three-piece of Clive Palmer, Mike Heron and Robin Williamson. In Scotland, they evolved into a psychedelic hippie four-piece after Clive left and Licorice McKechnie and Rose Simpson joined. They had all sorts of adventures and got involved with Scientology and went through various other incarnations before the song did have a sort of ending in 1974. Well, we're going to hear all about that in this, the first of a two-parter. This is the incredible string band from the outside with Adrian Whittaker, who compiled that book I mentioned earlier, and with an appearance from Peter Neal, who made the film Be Glad for the Song Has No Ending back in 1970. And thanks to Peter, we're going to hear various clips from that as we go. In the next episode, we're going to meet Rose Simpson. So we're going to hear about the incredible string band from the inside, because Rose, for 4 incredible string years, lived a full-on countercultural life in the last years of the 60s and early years of the 70s as a muse and a member of the band. But for now, let's dive in. Welcome to the Bureau of Lost Culture, Adrian Whittaker.
Hello, hi Stephen.
We're going to talk about the book. We're going to talk about, of course, the incredible string band. And you sent me something the other day and it struck a chord with me saying that Fan, and this is a book which is written by a fan, includes testimonies of fans and the band and commentators and all sorts of other people. But fan is short for fanatic. Yeah. And actually, this is a work of fanaticism. And the incredible string band, they're one of those bands, one of those artistic endeavours that collected around them fanatics, even when they were gone. So tell us, why are you an incredible string band fanatic?
For me, it started in 1968. I went to the record library. I found Hangman's Beautiful Daughter there. And then it was kind of out on permanent loan, really, for the next few months. And that, I just loved it. It spoke to something. It spoke to me. It was kind of otherworldly. It led me into all kinds of other stuff as well, like Robert Graves is the White Goddess and world religions and stuff. But it was a kind of pretty much a kind of solitary pursuit. Well, me and my friend Keith from school, and we do things like go to listing booths in the lunch hour and listen to the new album because we couldn't actually afford to buy it. But so the kind of tribe thing, the slightly fanatical string band fans, I didn't really meet up with those until the late 80s, which is the era of fanzines. And I put on 2 films at the Rio Cinema in Dalston. That was like a gathering of the tribes. And then I started writing for fanzines. So then there was a sort of this group of people who were pretty seriously into the string band, but also into finding out stuff because so little was really known about them back then. So out of that grew the book.
They're one of those bands. I mean, I can think of others. The Grateful Dead's an obvious example, isn't it?
Yep.
I mean, Dylan too, who have generated this kind of fascination. And tribal's a great word, actually, isn't it? For people who somehow they've elevated themselves, or they've been elevated above the kind of common or garden run-of-the-mill band.
I'm with you on Dylan and the Grateful Dead, and also Syd Barrett. I mean, there was a very, very huge Syd Barrett fans.
Well, Syd Barrett's appeared in ghostly form on this show a number of times, including...
Yes, I know, yeah.
I guess we could also include possibly Nick Drake. Whatever it is that generates that. You mentioned Hangman's Beautiful Daughter, which I think many people regard as the peak of incredible string band's work. And you mentioned then it opened the doors for you to Robert Graves' mythology. And maybe this is the answer to the earlier question about, why a band would inspire that kind of tribal loyalty, is that there's something particular in that album, isn't there, that's mixing all sorts of things, mythology, folklore, psychedelic thinking, as well as this layered world music.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a winter album. I mean, unlike We Tam the Big Huge, which is really a summer album, and it's dark. And there's there's a sort of bit of a pagan vibe to them, not as much as some people think, really. But on that album, it's really where you get that kind of pagan thing from songs like 3 is a Green Crown, which is kind of quite frightening, really. And Swift as the Wind, which is Mike Herron's take on that kind of stuff. It's dark and it is layered, and it brings in all these different musical elements.
And it also feels like it sort of taps deep into the British psyche in some way, right? Some folk tradition. And I think one of the things which is interesting is that they're from Edinburgh, right? They're Scottish. And so there was this vibrant Scottish counterculture, which they emerged from, right?
Yeah, I mean, there were surprisingly small scenes. Biggest scene around the string band in the early days was actually one folk club, so-called Clive's Incredible Folk Club, which there's a lot of mythology, and some of it's true and some of it isn't. But that was a real meeting point for people. And then out of it, there were kind of things that were linked into other disciplines, drama and art and so on. There was a sort of layers of people who were sort of often just out in the countryside doing something, and not necessarily all that gathering together. I think that gathering together might have happened at string band concerts in 68 onwards, even in Scotland,
So they came out of that folk scene. Where
they
do you link in these other themes which came in, this kind of deep folklore, the theatrical aspect to them, which, came to the fore a bit later on, as you mentioned then. The other kind of psychedelic, let's call it that, influence is this kind of potpourri of countercultural life and music.
Robin particularly was steeped in kind of folk stuff in the early days, but also had this hankering to travel. And as soon as they got the advance for the first album, he set off for Morocco, intending to stay there forever. He steeped himself in North African music and modal tunings, and learned the kind of Arabic flute and all that kind of stuff. So when he came back from there, he met up with Mike, and Mike had been doing what he calls a kind of little wire rack harmonica tour with Clive Palmer of the folk clubs. And that launched them into something which was more kind of steeped in world music and also steeped in acid, which had taken off by then. In fact, Clive Palmer was, I think, the first person in Scotland to be arrested for possession of LSD when it became illegal, I think, at the end of 1966. The performing, it's kind of interesting because, again, it's more the visual aspects are more Robin than Mike. I mean, Mike was much more into straight performances. Robin, I think, was always casting around some way to amplify. So their first big thing was having the two dancers, Mimi and Mouse, who were an important part of it in the late 60s. A bit written out of history, but they were real professionals. They'd studied Indian dance, they'd studied at the Royal College of Ballet. They were there to enhance the songs, really. That's how Robin saw it. And Mike, I have to say, was much more dubious about them. But then that went on then with bringing in Rose and Licorice and, then later on the whole Exploding Galaxy lot, the kind of Malcolm and Rakis and Stone Monkey and so on. So it all developed. It went through kind of phases, but that intention was always there. And you can see it as well in Peter Neal's film With Them and About Them, Be Glad for the Song There's No Ending, where there's a whole kind of fantasy sequence, isn't there, of for hanging out round Pentre Ifan Cromlech near Fishguard.
Only a palace with interior doors, well painted, well gargoyled, with multiple floors. 2 windows let free this projector machine, and the magical world here appears on the screen. My servants attend me with tricks of the senses, the past and the future, and similar tenses. On platters of air they convey me my measure, both gladness and sorrow, I lack not for treasure. The Lord and his lady are seated within, in the court of the mind, where the song does begin. The song is as fine as follows. The song does continue through measureless hollows that sink from the levels of personal being, through caverns of darkness where dragons are dwelling. The mountains above them are raised at my calling, where the apples are ripe, or the rain is falling. And in ships of white vision I sail the horizon, where 3 spinners stand beyond the horizon, under the tree with the apples of beauty. I watch them arranging my days and tomorrows. The song is as fine as follows. I stood on the beach where the moon was a-curling. I laughed on the wings of the seabirds calling. I loved when sweet Venus a lover did bring me. I cried when sweet Saturn and Jupiter moved us. And all of my servants were fighting their brothers, and the Lord and his lady, they hated each other, till the spinners arose with their work on their fingers, commanding the presence of heavenly singers, that spoke of the silence so soon to be coming, when all would be still in the wonderful palace. Then all of these warriors left off their struggles, threw swords to the earth, and embraced each other. This peace is not stillness, but peacefully changing. This hope is the hope of the man on the gallows. The song is as fine as follows. The infant I was in the womb of my mother. The white sperm I was in the loins of my father. And before that I swam in the oceans of nowhere, where the fish are as fine as the color of colors, where the wind is the message of centuries rolling, where the waves are the breath of the Holy Creator, where all of the rivers, grown mighty with flowing, and crowned with the gifts of the myriad valleys, return with a sigh to the sea of their coming, forever and ever and ever and ever. Be glad, oh be glad, for the song has no ending.
Did acid play a big part in it then?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously acid itself was a huge part of countercultural developments in the 60s all around the West. For them,
well, I think quite a lot, and up to probably the end of '68. I mean, Shirley Collins actually have said Robin was an acid evangelist, and you've not seen a tree properly until you've seen it on acid, that kind of thing. It was a big part, I think. Rose Simpson, who you're going to be talking to, would probably say the same. That phased out, I think, '69, they were moving away from that kind of thing, and also the first intimations of Scientology, which also kind of had a downer on the psychedelic experience.
Yeah, we should come back to that definitely, but they record the first album, The Incredible String Band, in 66. Joe Boyd, friend of the show, incredible sort of mover and shaker in all these times, UFO Club, Nick Drake, John Martin, lots of other people he's produced, Pink Floyd in fact as well. They record this album and it's actually reasonably successful. It's folk album of the year in Melody Maker. Bob Dylan praises it, with a quite downbeat statement saying it was quite good. But from Dylan, that's obviously high.
That was October song, yeah.
But they do this extraordinary thing. I mean, most bands, certainly these days anyway, they're getting a record label, getting a producer like Joe Boyd, and, the record doing quite well. They'd be thinking like, oh, crikey, we're off. This is it, the road to stardom. What do these guys do? They all split up.
Yeah.
Clive Palmer goes on the hippie trail to Afghanistan. Robin Williams and Licorice head off to Morocco. And
that's right. Yeah.
Mike Heron stays in Edinburgh. I mean, that's quite a countercultural thing, isn't it? Stardom obviously was not a big part of their constellation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And of course, what happened when they were away, or two of them were away, was the whole thing took off, and Joe Boyd got Judy Collins interested in covering songs, and then they won that big Albert Hall concert with Tom Paxton, and kind of reinvigorated them. And also Mike was indentured, which is a quaint Scottish custom where you pay a load of money and to train as an accountant in his case, and you're indentured. There's major penalties if you leave before the end of your indenture. So indenture. So that would have kept him there really until 67 sometime. He couldn't really go very far. He could play maybe a weekend gig somewhere.
Can't get less counterculture than that, studying for your accountancy exams.
Yes.
while the other two are off for the hippie trail.
Absolutely.
But when they come back, in their absence, things have actually started to take off. So they get together again. Of course, also, Robin has come back from Morocco with a whole bunch of strange instruments, right? That kind of injects the travels maybe in the opening of consciousness by, these voyages to dim and distant exotic lands that kind of inspired them in a different way, hasn't it? Because the next thing they do is a major psychedelic step up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, psychedelic, but still a bit poppy, still a bit accessible. 5,000 Spirits. And Mike, of course, had been listening to a lot of world music, again, on the kind of non-such record label, Elektra's label for that. So he was kind of steeped in things like music of the Bahamas and Hawaiian stuff and so on. People kind of say the opening notes of Chinese White, first track on the first side, with the gimbri screeching away, is like a real signal that the music is moving far away from that folk club sort of trad thing.
I guess there's a link with somebody like Brian Jones who, was bringing those kind of world music kind of influences even into the Stones.
Yes.
But the Incredible Stringman, I mean, you can't really underestimate how rad that was at the time, really. Even though it was a psychedelic era, they were channeling stuff from a lot further afield.
They were, and perhaps a bit more intensely than some of the people that played around with that idea, like Donovan, for example. Right. They took it quite seriously, and Mike had sitar lessons in London. Yeah, they kind of studied it quite a bit, not that they were kind of maestros, but it wasn't just a little bit of kind of dusting on the cake,
Well, 5,000 Spirits, that elevates their public profile quite a lot, doesn't it? It's sort of rave reviews
totally, yeah,
in the press, and then they start to play at UFO Club, which is Joe Boyd and Hobby Hopkins' place, and other places in London, of course, and that introduces them really or introduces the London Underground in a sense to them. And John Peel's playing them on his Perfume Garden radio show on the pirate stations. Suddenly, they're like embedded in this wider kind of British counterculture, not just the folk scene or the Scottish counterculture, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting place, which I'd never really come across before, in the whole kind of London sort of little centres and scenes, which was called Baghdad House. Baghdad House was a kind of Iraqi restaurant and club where there was live Iraqi music in Drayton Gardens. Brian Jones would hang out there, and so did the string band, and so did Mark Bolan, I think, and so did Mimi and Mouse, the two dancers. So that was another little scene around there with a definite North African, Middle Eastern vibe.
And they also start to get like plaudits. Paul McCartney says it's his favourite record. Suddenly they're off, aren't they? And then 68, The Hangman's Beautiful Daughter. Maybe you could say a bit more about that album and why it matters so much. But Hangman gets into top 5 in the UK album charts, yeah.
It was, as I said, really such an intense distillation of all that kind of stuff with all these elements, sitar playing, Gimri, all the musical stuff. Bahamas is in there as well. The song, Cellular Song, bits of trippy stuff, bits of slightly odd folk tunes are in there. dark pagan stuff. So it was there in a very condensed format, which was just so different from anything else. And also in a very appealing cover, which was the cover originally was just Mike and Robin sitting on a wall in the snow and nothing on the back. All the sort of stuff about who played what and lyrics were on a kind of fold out sheet inside. On the back you just had this weird looking another sort of tribe really. But of course Rose is there. She wasn't even in the band at the time. She was visiting. So that got turned around later years and that became the front, just to reflect the role of the women in the band.
So Licorice McKechnie and Rose Simpson, who obviously we're hearing from, not only kind of partners of the two of them, but they're joined the band and adding lots of kind of dimensions to it, vocals and all sorts of other instruments, right? I mean, Rose becomes a very good bass player.
Yeah.
But let's just talk a little bit, Adrian, about the relationship between Robin and Mike, because I think what's quite apparent in the book, they'd had Clive Palmer, the original cornerstone of the trio, in common. They were both friends of him, but they weren't really friends of each other, right? And there was this kind of tension which was creative and difficult at times between them.
There was, yeah. I mean, Clive was a bridge because he was fairly easygoing, really. And I mean, in a way, it was often a good one. They'd seek to outdo each other on how they embellished the other songs, because that was always the deal, really. If you write a song, I get to play some sort of lead instrument.
Sometimes songs are about things that have happened to you, and sometimes songs are about things that you would like to make happen or like to see happen, or they're fantasy songs that you make up. Or else they're songs that just kind of visit themselves upon you like dreams. Or else there's songs which are about things you've suddenly understood and which just open up a whole new channel, so you write that down.
And bringing the so-called girls, the two women in, as Rose will tell you, sort of broaden things out again, probably diffuse some of the tension, but also they actually had quite formalised roles in the band by 1969. Rose was the bass player and Licky was the keyboard player, and that probably made the whole working relationships easier, really. There were two other people there to kind of diffuse that.
Creative tensions in bands, Lennon and McCartney, obviously, it's not a bad thing, is it? Sometimes it's producing some of the best work. So they had this deal, didn't they, whereas they keep the songs separate, unlike Lennon and McCartney, they were always attributed to one or the other of them. But the one who hadn't written the song was allowed to kind of put their fingerprints all over it by kind of arranging it.
That worked very well. I mean, it only really fell apart in the last year of the band when they really started pulling in different directions, and also record company pressure to be commercial, to be successful, which was anathema really to Robin, perhaps. To
go back to 68, so by this time, Rose and Licky are in the band, they're off, they're filling major venues, Festival Hall, they play at the Fillmore in San Francisco, Albert Hall. Now, when they're in America, something happens which is possibly doomed them, certainly changed their direction, isn't it? Which is that they get involved in Scientology. Tell us a little bit about that, Adrian.
It's kind of weird, really. I mean, they'd clearly been searching for stuff, and they grew up in quite traditional middle-class families, perhaps a bit restrictive. And so they were always kind of looking for something that was going to provide some new references. And strangely, Licorice, who was probably the one that was most needed some sort of secure thing to hang on to as a person, was her who got buttonholed by somebody at the very end of 68 and very quickly convinced Robin, and followed later on by Mike Heron and most unwillingly, I'd say, Rose. Imperceptible at first, but by end of 1970, which is when Rose left, really, early 71, it was beginning to have a real hold on how they were. Not necessarily badly. Some of it was about effective communication. So some of that conflict stuff between Mike and Robin was dealt with in perhaps a better way than it had been in the past. But it also meant that it became gradually more straight ahead. really, the music, and the way it lost some of its charm and mystery. Although till the end, there was always something showed they were still capable of redemption, even right down to the very last album. There were a couple of tracks that were really great.
Scientology was, I suppose, in a sense, was part of what you might call the kind of the decline. But in '69, there was this kind of diversion, and it's something that I wasn't aware of, is that they do actually play at Woodstock.
Yeah.
But of course, they kind of omitted from the film because they kind of refused to play in the rain. So they got some of their slot was moved, wasn't it, into amongst the hard rockers. So
they were always uncompromising. So you'd go and see them. And
Right.
you think, oh, I'd really like to hear some of those songs off Changing Horses, which had just come out like a month ago. And they were playing songs that I haven't even recorded that were going to be on the next album. Even with festivals where logic usually dictates you do a bit of a greatest hits set, they didn't. It was all songs nobody had ever heard before. And, you know, that's not guaranteed to work so well. So that's part of it too.
There's no more guaranteed way to chill an audience by introducing a song and saying, this is off our next album.
Well, they didn't even say that. But I mean, the performances actually, having heard the whole Woodstock box set, they're quite good actually.
Well, let's come back to these shores anyway, because in '69, they get involved with the Exploding Galaxy. Jill Drower been on this show talking about the Exploding Galaxy, this kind of avant-garde, experimental, theatrical dance troupe based in London and inspired by David Medalla, this exotic creature. So tell us a little bit about their involvement with them, because there'd always been this theatrical side. That turned into a proper psychedelic conjunction, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they met Malcolm and his friend Rakis at the Chelsea Hotel, actually, in New York in '68. And eventually Robin and co got a farmhouse in Wales, a very kind of damp, inhospitable place near Fishguard, round the corner from Cromlech, Pentre Ifan.
Here is a sidebar about the film Be Glad the Song Has No Ending, with director Peter Neal. The film was released in July 1970 and it's in two parts. The first part is stage performance from a March 1968 Royal Festival Hall concert with interviews of the band about their thought processes and ways of living by journalists, and then later at the group's communal home in Glasgow, along with clips of their crazy countercultural daily lives. But part two is where it really gets trippy. It involves the group with friends out in West Wales, dressing up to create a 20-minute drama play called The Pirate and the Crystal Ball. And the filming of that was completed in one insane weekend. The basic storyline includes a pirate attempting to steal a crystal ball from three fates played by Rose Simpson, Licorice McKechnie, and their friend Helena Schofield. These fates enlist a hunter, the dancer Malcolm Maestro, who was later a member of the band, to set matters right, and the hunter captures the pirate, another dancer, to be judged by two gods, Robin and Mike. And in the end, the pirate is forced into an endless reincarnation cycle. A collage of psychedelic images relating to the pirate's past begins and ends with the sound of a baby's cry.
I'd been doing some pop promos and things back in the 60s, and I'd met this guy called John Marshall, and who came and told me about Jimi Hendrix. Having made a film with Jimi Hendrix, how can you follow up on that? We both agreed the only other people we'd be interested in is going to a string band because they're unique. So we got in touch with Joe Boyd and then Mike and Robin, and the film kind of built up from there. Really, it was like the Hendrix film. It was done in bits and pieces. We'd always start off these things by doing a concert because that gives you a grounding. I wanted to know what made them tick as human beings and why they were doing what they were doing. So I think we filmed their Royal Festival Hall concert where they did Noah's Ark thing at the beginning, and then sort of ideas spread because you get the idea of the Noah's Ark of animals, the Noah's Ark of their instruments, 110 instruments on the stage which they tiptoe around and pick up and play. Then obviously you move on to things like talking to them about themselves and their motivation and what they're trying to do. And that coincided with a American reporter doing an interview. We thought that was interesting to see what this American guy made of Mike. I mean, it's almost like they were living in different planets. The guy who asked him, where do your songs come from? You know, Mike who, to be honest, was very stoned. In fact, before he started the interview, he just said, "I'm just going out for a minute." About 5 minutes later. I thought it'd be nice to have them both standing on this bleak Scottish hillside, sort of showing the space between them. Ryan in particular was deeply into myth and stories, which I was too. There was that connection, and I sensed that in them, which was very deep-rooted. Not even folk music, it was grown out of that. There was no other music like it, quite honestly. They embodied it, and they were taken to heart by the counterculture for that reason. I mean, they had nothing to do with the commercialisation of music, even though I believe they were the fourth biggest album-selling band in the country at the time. You know, after the Beatles and the Stones and the Who or whatever it was. It was also the kind of time when people were really getting interested in world music, and they combined sounds from all over the place, and all their instruments were from all over. Robin's singing was more in the vein of an Indian singer rather than a Scottish folk singer, and I think all those combined to give them this magical edge. There was no other concert like a string band concert. This was a big party, you know, we're having fun, enjoy this with us. And I mean, he was a great raconteur, Robin, still is.
Where some people think they're bodies, some people think they're animals, some people know that they're spirits, and some people think that they're inferior to a great God who created everything. Some people think that they're part of that God that created everything. And some people realize that every moment they're creating the future.
Verily, verily, I am the pebble in your very own eye. I am the sword and your enemy dies. I am the storm and the hurricane wind. I am the thorn of an unkind friend. I am desire, what color my eyes. I am Loki, wizard of lies. Catch me and find me, see me if you can. I am the guilt of an honest man.
My name is Robin Williamson, genius of this parish. How do you do?
Oh, gate of the soft mystery, I love you if you love me. Guide me with the gold of Gabriel's wings. Grant me the tongue that all the earth does sing. Vibrating light, forever one the sun. The book of life is open to us, there'll be no secrets left.
We just felt, in a way, this was a collaborative film. But the idea was to do some kind of folk tale, some kind of fable, which they would conceive of and I would film. They were living down in farm in Wales, and I found my way there with great difficulty. And I had no idea at this point what they were going to do. And when I arrived, they said, "Well, we'll go out in the field there." And we got these this idea about the three muses. We filmed that with the crystal ball. They kept laying things on me. So really what I was doing was kind of helping them realise their ideas on film, advising everything on the spot. There was never any idea of, this is the story, what do you think? Or anything. It was done like a happening, the whole thing. Summer Stone Monkey came, Malcolm the Maester obviously, and Rackus, and playing characters, and it just grew like topsy. So in my head, I knew where all these bits were going to go, and what I didn't know is how we were going to do the soundtrack. I went to visit them in a hotel in London where they'd stripped all the beds out and were sleeping on the floor, and they said, "Well, we're playing around with some music." And I said, "Well, you just do some music. You know the story. So they brought up all these bits and pieces of music. And that's how the soundtrack came in the end, which, I mean, I loved the music for it. I thought it was great. I spoke with Robin, who was the most critical, many years later. He said, "Yeah, I think you really caught us. In a way, it has a sweet amateurishness about it, like they do. It caught them and their mood and what was going on at the time. So I think, in a way, it's unique amongst music films. I mean, a lot of people loved it. Probably a lot of people didn't love it at all. But it survived. You know, the fact is, I think, testament to it is that people are still watching it." I think it was made in a weekend, and that included travelling from London to Wales and back again, and not sleeping at all because, you know, we worked all through the night, not eating really, because there wasn't time and nobody was looking after food. There were some sacks of brown rice in the kitchen, but nobody was interested in cooking. We did go into the local town for half an hour to get fish and chips. But otherwise nobody ate, nobody seemed to sleep. Joe Boyd had driven me down, that's right, he was there. And we were going to come back, and the back axle broke on the car. There was myself, and my friend Joe Boyd, and Mike, and the car broke down. It was the middle of the night, and I had to be in London at 9 o'clock for a filming session. I mean, with Gregory Peck and people like that. We traipsed across this field and knocked on this farmer's door and asked, "Can you take us to London, please?" Oh, bless him. You know, he said, "Sit down, have a cup of tea, you look tired. What do you do?" And Mike said, "Well, I'm a musician." "Oh, yeah, I love music." And then he got his car out and drove us all the way to London. Nobody really had worries at the time, other than about the state of the world. You didn't have worries about yourself. Total confidence that everything would turn out all right if you just smiled and loved everyone. True, there was a great kind of optimism at the time. That was a key element to community, that you had to build community. And that was what, to me, the counterculture was kind of about, was building community. Had to care about each other.
So Malcolm and Rakis would do kind of mimes and dances here and there with them. But then it built up when they moved into a row of houses, Glen in Leitham, Scotland. It wasn't communal living, which a lot of them didn't really want, but they lived together, but they had separate space. And in that was born the preparations for the U show that was on at the Roundhouse. That was, I think, 1970. There were two stages, string band on the left, Stone Monkey as it was then, which was a lot of people from Exploding Galaxy. On the right, some of it was really good. I mean, I went twice. I was like 17, I think. But some of it was, oh no, this is dreadful hand-waving stuff. The thing was, Malcolm was a very good dancer and Rakis was a good character dancer. He'd play like pirates and stuff. And everyone else was just flopping their arms around a bit. So nobody really knew how to read it. I mean, later on, Rose said, I think what people didn't really get, that really it was like our end of term party show.
Yeah, sure.
And that's true, you know. It's like, you do that bit and I'll do that bit.
Well,
Oh, you do that bit, but you do so-and-so.
That's the thing with expressive dance, isn't it? It can be very moving or it can be absolutely teeth-grindingly awful and embarrassing, depending on who's doing it. But they were bold, weren't they?
They were bold, yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of that was Robin's vision, these theatrical fancies, and I think he described it as a surreal parable in dance and song,
Yeah.
These are levels of spiritual awareness, communicate something a bit mythic. As you move into the 70s with the counterculture generally, there is this move out into the country and to communes and stuff, and so they were part of that too, with their way of living together. But also it's about to crash into the dark, more socially grounded counterculture of Britain in the 70s, which was this more bleaker place than the 60s, wasn't it? With a bit less hope and a bit more political,
yes,
a bit more hard edge. And so I'm guessing that a lot of this stuff might have started to appear to be rather overly fanciful and disconnected with the sort of realities of life, possibly.
Sure. Joe Boyd enabled them, and he also protected them from a lot of stuff.
Right.
And he was also the intermediary between them and the record company, which was Elektra, although he didn't like you, but he kind of dealt with it. And when he left, they felt abandoned, really. Nobody was there to give a very clear direction. When Joe went back to America, they got transferred to Island Records. Island Records saw them much more as one of many bands we've got, and okay, what's commercial, and is there a single on this, and so on. And there was a slow pressure to kind of streamline it all and get rid of quite a lot of the visual aspects. There's often a little bit here and there. There'll be a little skit. Robin would do a funny song and Malcolm would do a kind of dance mime to it, and they were actually really good because he was real professional, Malcolm. I mean, that was good actually, but it didn't go on too long. It was like 3 or 4 minutes, and that was it.
They went on. They recorded another 5 albums with Island, didn't they? But it was sort of a bit like diminishing returns in a sense. And the show which Joe had piloted, though not liking it, this You show had gone to California, Fillmore East, and been a bit of a flop, and it's quite interesting with Joe because when you've got very experimental, slightly crazy artists like these guys, if you've got somebody like that who, as you say, can sort of protect them but also kind of shepherd them somewhat, it kind of works, doesn't it? But in the absence of that, it gets really quite difficult. I also wanted to just drop in the fact, which I didn't realise, but I mean, in a sense, how many people were influenced particularly by the earlier albums. I mean, Robert Plant, saying that those early Led Zeppelin albums, the folky ones, were kind of built on an incredible string band template.
Yeah, or some of the songs. Yes, they're still friends with Rose, actually. No, but also, rather unlikely as well, was Neil Tennant, Pet Shop Boys, who in his kind of teens was absolutely blown away by them. So he was like a bit of a fanatic. He'd go to all the gigs up in Newcastle, around that area, hang out backstage. And his first group was a folk group, sort of psychedelic folkish, I think. 2 boys, 2 girls, called Dust.
Pet Shop Boys Neil Tennant was a huge, incredible string band fan. It's quite astounding, isn't it? Given the arc of his own amazing career afterwards. Stephen Duffy, Lilac Time, told me that incredible string band were a major taking off point for him. Like you, I think he saw them in Birmingham in the 70s when he was, I think, 14 or something, and his own career, which has involved pop stardom at least twice, and early on, with a kind of electronic 80s pop, but he kept returning to the Lilac Time, which is obviously his main love. And I think for the Lilac Time, incredible string band were kind of a major sort of mythic mentor. They split in 74, and I suppose in some ways it was a good job, really, wasn't it? Because it's really difficult given the fact that punk was about to happen in 75 and 76. The Incredible String Band coexisting alongside Sex Pistols seems sort of preposterous somehow. That's not a critique of the Incredible String Band, but it's just that the times had changed so radically.
The times, I mean, even in '74, they were touring in America quite often as support to big sort of classic rock act. Bruce Springsteen they supported twice. Yes, I mean, Robin said publicly that they should have split up 2 years before they did, because they were already pulling in different directions, really noticeably. Probably it was Scientology that kept them together, when really they could have moved on happily, I think.
They inspired you as a youngster, and there is this tribe of people who love them. The book came out of that. And if you look back at that kind of first gig where you were sort of blown away, and then sort of look down the years at the things that have happened since, how do they feature in your own musical imagination now?
There was a time when they were always there, really. But thinking about all that stuff again when I was finishing the book, editing the book and writing stuff for it, and preparing for the launch, which we had at the Marmaid Club a couple of weeks ago, where people played string band songs, and Mike turned up, actually, out of the blue. Mike Aaron came, has sent me back to that. And I began to get some of the immediacy and the freshness I got from listening to Hangman again.
You've sort of laid it to rest with this book, which is a beautiful production, full of fascinating stuff, including some very early fan fiction. You know, they were one of the first bands to actually inspire their fans to create sort of fictional works featuring them as characters, right?
That's Andrew Gregg, who's quite a well-known Scottish novelist and poet, who actually performed at the launch as well.
As we sort of draw to the end, Adrian, I just wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about something which, of course, is rather tragic in their whole story, which is Licorice, Christina McKechnie, who was part of the band along with Rose. The band splits in '74. She was the one, as you mentioned, who was kind of keenest on Scientology and the most vulnerable. And she does various things. She goes to California, she's still involved with music, reunited with Robin later in the '70s, where she becomes, but goes to Edinburgh in 1986 to see her family, but her whereabouts have been unknown since 1990.
She fell out with Scientology quite badly. And anyone who leaves Scientology, if they've got a name already, famous musician, get pursued and harassed, So I think that's why she disappeared, really. And there's a lot of mythology about it. What her family think, that's her sister and her nephews, is that she's living, as Robin once said, actually hiding in plain sight somewhere in California.
So she's just keeping a very low profile. I think we all love myths. Of course, Incredible String Band and Syd Barrett have gathered a lot of myths about them, but that's quite appealing, isn't it? As long as it isn't you or your family, of somebody kind of walking off into the desert, like in the Wim Wenders film Parish, Texas, or Sid walking off into the English woodland, gaining enlightenment in some way. But in fact, it's probably a little bit more pedestrian than that, right? So we've come to the end, Adrian, and thank you for this kind of very rapid walk through the life and times of the Incredible String Band. There's so much more to it, as is revealed in your doorstopper of a book. It is a big book in all sorts of ways, and an extraordinary peek, not only into their peculiar countercultural life and times, but into the life and times of the counterculture era. In some ways, it felt to me like their trajectory was a bit parallel to the classic countercultural trajectory, from sort of folk roots through psychedelia into the kind of communal living of the 70s.
Well, one thing I didn't really underline enough, I think, was that the book is really multiple voices, but other people as well, both band members, band kind of acolytes, and just fans. And that, I think, makes it quite an interesting thing, because it's not overly fawning. There's some sort of distance in most people's writings when they write about them, pay tribute to all the other people who wrote stuff that is in the book that I collected together.
Its title, Be Glad for the Song Has No Ending, is rather lovely, isn't it? Because you feel, I suspect, that Incredible String Band's songs will live on.
Yeah, the songs live on. I mean, particularly that classic trio of albums, 5,000 Spirits, Hangman and We Turn the Big Huge. They live on. I mean, I could, sing them from front to back still now.
Adrian Whittaker, thanks very much for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Thank you for having me, Stephen.
So thanks to Adrian, thanks to Peter. Next time, as I mentioned, we'll be back with an interview with Rose Simpson, about her life and times within the incredible string bubble, as we decided to call it. It's a truly amazing and crazy story. If you want more, check out the incredible string band book, Big Lad for the Song Has No Ending, written or compiled by Adrian and published by Strange Attractor, and Peter's film, Be Glad for the Song Has No Ending. I'll put a link to both in the show notes. I'm going to be back with Peter too to talk about some more of his adventures filming the counterculture next year. But for now, I'd like to wish you happy solstice, a countercultural Christmas, and peace and love for this sad old world in 2024. Thanks for being with me and with our guests this year. We really appreciate you. See you next time down the road, round the bend, for more tales from the other side, from the underground. Let's finish with a song.
Forever and ever and ever and ever. Be glad, oh be glad, for the song has no ending.